Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance. I'm your host, Chaz Andres, and as always, we're going to get started this week with the news. The biggest story, of course, is that the standard metagame, now featuring Ravnica Allegiance, is really starting to come into focus, and we have a sense of what the best decks in the format are. Sultai Midrange and Esper Control are the two clear frontrunners at the moment. They had really good performances at Star City Games Indianapolis last weekend. They did really well at Star City Games Baltimore this weekend. And also, they've got some pedigree. Sultai Midrange is essentially an updated version of last season's Golgari Midrange, and Esper Control is essentially a better version of Jeskai Control. So, these decks are looking great, and their staples are among the safest cards in Standard right now, at least from a financial hold perspective. Also, it's become pretty clear that the fact that neither Mono Red Aggro nor Bant Nexus made it into the top 8 in Indianapolis last weekend, that was more of an anomaly than a trend. Now, granted, these two decks are not the powerhouses they appear to be if you're exclusively playing, say, Arena Ranked Best of 1, where these two decks' unique quirks make them overpowered. But that doesn't mean they aren't a completely legitimate choice for this metagame. They are tier 2 decks at worst and underestimate them at your own risk. And then there are a bunch of other fun decks that look pretty dang viable right now. I mean, you've got Azorius Aggro and Mono Blue Aggro and Esper Midrange and 4-color Gates or Nexus of Gates or some Gates deck. That deck actually looks pretty good and pretty sweet. Anyway, you definitely want to check out the metagame breakdown in MTG Goldfish, and you probably want to listen to the latest episode of the Game podcast on Star City Games, because getting a sense of what the metagame actually is right now, which decks are actually performing well, is hugely important. There are quite a few cards that are only expensive because they were good in last season's decks, but they're not seeing much play right now. And spoiler alert, those cards tend not to stay valuable for very long. Let's move on now to gaining ground, where in Standard it was Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, gaining about 4 tickets from 14 up to 18, and honestly, it's been a long time coming for this card. Teferi is far and away the most expensive card in paper Standard, so there's no way it should be as low as 14 tickets on MTGO. So not only is Teferi a 4 of an Esper Control, which is definitely the best control deck in the format, but it's showing up in other places too, like Bant Nexus, where it's a really important way to gain control of the game. So, Hydroid Krasis may be the hottest card on the block right now, and that might be true for a while, but Teferi is still the card that the format runs through at the moment, and the price trend is reflecting that. This card is not anomalously sort of jumping around between 14 and 18, it is on its way up, it is continuing to gain. I would not be surprised if this card is past 20 and heading toward 25 by this time next week. Let's move on now to Modern, where the card that gained the most ground this week was Collective Brutality, jumping about 3 tickets from 7 up to 10, and this is actually the start of what looks like a legitimate trend. It's not just some anomalous wobbling up and down. See, this card bottomed out around 5 a couple of weeks ago, it's been slowly gaining since then, and I expect these gains to continue. Collective Brutality, I mean, it was as high as 40 tickets back in May. It hasn't ever been reprinted, it sees a ton of play in Modern, and it looked really good this weekend at Star City Games Baltimore, where Grixis Death Shadow was definitely one of the top decks in the format, if not the top deck. So this card has a lot of room to grow. My only worry is that I still don't really trust the Modern market, and I've been burned by a few cards over the past couple of weeks. So the upside is absolutely here if you want to take a risk on it, but just be careful about investing in any Modern card right now. Let's move on now to our biggest loser, where in Standard it was actually last week's darling, Hydroid Krasis, which was as high as 45 tickets for a moment last week before collapsing. It is now at 33 tickets, that's a drop of about 12, and oh no, rip the big old jellyfish, right? Well, not quite. See, that 45 ticket mark, I mentioned it was brief. It was very brief, and the card actually tanked as low as 27. That's where it bottomed out before rebounding early last week. It's been very stable at 33 tickets ever since then. So I actually think this is the card's new baseline, and you're pretty safe buying in around this 30 ticket mark if you need them. It should be fairly stable there for the foreseeable future. Now, over in Modern, the biggest loser this week was once again Surgical Extraction. It lost nothing another 5 tickets of value this week, dropping from 36 down to 31, but the price chart again kind of belies the truth here. It dropped a bit last week, then it rallied a bunch, and then it dropped again, now it's stable, so who really knows what's going on here? I mean, I still don't really trust the modern market, but on the other hand, I also sort of think that people were selling like the one modern card in their collection that still had value in order to buy into their Hydroid Crises or whatever, and if that ends up being true, then you're gonna start to see this one rebound again soon. If not, well, you've all seen plenty of modern cards tank over the past few months, so you know what that looks like. The sneak of the week this week is Lord Windgrace, the kitty cat planeswalker from Commander 2018, the Lands Matter Commander. It was as high as 15 tickets back in late December, dropped as low as 1 ticket in January, mostly because it was popping off in treasure chests and the market was tanking. It's back up to 6 tickets now and continuing to climb. And because of rebounding markets and changes in treasure chests, all of these Commander 2018 cards are worth taking a look at again. Lord Windgrace is probably not making it back up to 15 tickets anytime soon, but it still has some upside at 6, and all the rest of the cards from that cycle do as well. As always, we're going to end the week by taking a look at the MTGO Trader sales data so that we can see which cards are actually selling the best, regardless of price increases or decreases. Looking at overall sales by volume, we have a pretty clear number 1 this week in Persistent Petitioners, the common from Ravnica Allegiance. And this might be due to the fact that Polygon.com published a really cool article this week, highlighting the card as like a fun new way to play Magic, and people from outside the regular community may be coming in and buying these on MTGO, where it's a lot easier to get them than Arena, and they're playing them and it's fun, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't analyze it from a financial perspective. The interesting thing here is that Persistent Petitioners is basically cheap as free on MTGO, and you can just kind of throw some onto whatever other transaction you're making. This is important because we're not going to be drafting Ravnica Allegiance forever. At some point, this card is going to go from 0 to something more than 0. And hey, then you've got some free money on your hands. Who doesn't love free money? I love free money. Now, in terms of overall sales by price, something kind of interesting happened this week in that Arclight Phoenix overtook Hydroid Crisis for the number 1 spot. And I would not have guessed that going into looking at the numbers, because Arclight Phoenix doesn't really have a good deck in Standard right now. This jump, this climb in interest is mostly due to Modern, where Arclight Phoenix is still doing really well, and in fact, the Phoenix decks had a really good weekend on the Modern tables at SCG Baltimore. This is heartening to me because it says that, hey, maybe people are actually starting to reinvest in Modern. Maybe the Modern Index on MTGO is finally going to start seeing that resurgence. Jace the Mind Sculptor and Surgical Extraction also did pretty well by price this week, so fingers crossed this thing is starting to turn around. And that's all I got for you this week. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Chaz Andres. I will see you next Monday morning for another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance.